Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about getting taken advantage of. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, as a friendly software engineering tech lead who assumes only positive intent, how can you ensure that you are not taken advantage of? Well, this comes back to that thing that is so critical for which is what I argue to people. If you do not know the work of your software developers almost as well as they do, in other words, you are not a software developer, you have no way whatsoever to figure this out without basically guessing. Okay, it's always a guess, but you can make an informed guess and you can make an uninformed guess. Because the reality is, as I've said 100 times before, if my analogy is, software developers are like wizards and coding is like magic. For most people, it is basically magic. And the problem with magic is that if someone tells you that it's a very complicated spell you're going to cast, or like it's very complicated magic, you have no way of knowing if it's difficult. I can just say that this is very complicated, and all your arguments fall on the fact that you have to either you trust that that's basically what it comes down to. Do you trust me as an individual, or don't you? Because if I say that A, B, or C is very difficult, then you're going to have to take me at my word, because you can't evaluate that. And if I am a person who actually, it doesn't have to mean that I lie. It might be that I'm just not very good at what I do, and then everything is complicated. But if you had someone else, would it make things as complicated? Because I've never really had that problem. Like, I've never really faced a challenge where I said that this is going to be a problem for me and my team. Because when we work on things together, usually when I work with software teams, we structure them with people who are, everything from juniors all the way up to very senior people. But the challenges that we put people on and the things that we face, it's very rare that we can't come up with a good work strategy that will solve basically every problem. I've never had that problem. But I also know that for software managers who in other teams that I've worked with and so forth, they hire basically incompetent people, and then everything is hard all the time. Nothing can be done, and that's sort of the issue, because if you don't know the work of the software engineers, you don't know if you're getting a good person or just someone who talks a lot. It really comes down to that. It is that simple. So if you don't want to be taken advantage of, you have to have some way of evaluating the delivery and the expectations that you can put on each individual. And that's why you have to have some way of measuring things. Now, for me as a tech lead, or like when I work with software developers, it's super easy for me. It is so easy because I can read the pull request, and I can see the way that the backlog is flowing. And the tip that I have given most of the people that I work with is that if you're going to measure any metric of productivity within the software teams, measure how long things are in ready for code review or ready for release, depending on what backlog or what Kanban board you're using. Because usually the time that is wasted, like the most amount of time wasted, is usually found when the handoffs are happening, where a software developer who's producing code has to be reviewed or something like that, or testing is happening and so forth, because most software developers prioritize their own work above all else and very rarely automatically help their coworkers with their work. And that usually is an indication where the bottlenecks are within your team. And then when you can see the code reviews, you can see how many amendments an individual makes to each individual pull request. So if you have someone who is like consistently like you, because I can read all them, I can see every commit, I can see how long everything takes, I know exactly when it happened even, and I can see the work that's been put in. And like if you do some very, very basic checking on how long has this card been here, and how many commits have been made at what time intervals, and what is the amount of work that was produced between those in these time intervals, you can basically figure out how fast this person is working. It's actually very, very simple. And if you consistently see like an individual who, they redo things over and over and over. They continuously get like almost silly feedback on things, and they very rarely ship things in a timely manner, and like they take a long time on a lot of stuff. That's usually a person who is not all that productive. But then you have other cases. I've worked with software developers. This is a tricky case. This is one of those cases where where you have to make a pragmatic choice. I've worked with a guy who was really, really good as a software developer. He was able to produce at a very like a solid mid-level software developer. He could solve most problems. He was a engine type of person, like he just churned out code. And then all of a sudden, for a few weeks, like his productivity went to like nothing. Like he almost produced nothing whatsoever. And like I heard, like in every stand-up, I heard these sort of like, oh yeah, I was checking some documentation, like these sort of like nothing comments. It's sort of like if you ask out a pretty girl or like a nice guy or whatever, when they give you like these really bullshit, well, I mean, that's never happened to me, of course, but to people I've heard about have had those answers like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do my laundry today, or I'm gonna freeze in some ice cubes today. Like this is a nothing answer to the question, right? And this guy had a lot of that. So as I actually I said that to my manager because he was asking for my feedback on the team's overall performance, and I said, well, they're like A, B, and C are doing really well, but this guy here, he's really good. The problem is that it's very inconsistent. I suspect that he might actually have periods where he just actually doesn't do any work. He's a remote worker as well, so there's no like, I can't really check in on him, but I can see in the output and the answers he's giving to why things are taking time. Like I can, based on my experience, I can figure out that this person is probably not putting 100% in. And then my manager said, well, yeah, should we get rid of him? And I said, here's the problem. He is good, and he does produce when it's sort of like, to me this is sort of like a horse who's sort of slowed down a little bit. You just need to like put the spurs in the horse a little bit so that the horse is aware of, you should move a little bit faster. So just talk to him and say that, yeah, we'll see, is there something going on? Like just have the conversation with them and see what happens. Because if you just make him aware of that this seems a little bit odd, you don't have to attack or do like anything aggressive, just say that and see what happens. Because the reality is that if you fire such an individual, you're basically throwing away a person who's under normal circumstances pretty damn good, and we don't know exactly what's going on here, right? And the reality is, the question is, do you have someone else to replace him? And I mean, I said that sort of as sarcastically to my manager, because I know that they didn't. Because the average time it takes to find such a guy like this guy is measured in months. At least they don't need people that have that skill level are not. I've interviewed about 100 or 200 people by now. I know how many people that I've met that have that level of skill, right? So it's a balancing act, as I said to my manager. And said and done, we talked to him, and all of a sudden he was productive a little bit. I mean, it's not a done problem, but it at least helped a little bit. And in situations like that, it is really a trade-off. Like, could we have gotten someone potentially who was more, because I mean, he's being paid a lot of money for this, of course. Could we have gotten somebody better? Maybe. But this is someone who is going to be able to do the job. And as I said, on average, he does really, really well. It's just that sometimes he just doesn't have the energy or whatever motivation needed. Or it might be something else. I don't actually know. Could be anything. That's why I don't want to make assumptions. So what I want you to take away from this is that the way that you don't get taking, if you, because I really do agree with this. I think that you should always give people the benefit of doubt and try to see things as positively as possible. And the only thing that you should really concern yourself with, in my opinion, is that balance between output and team satisfaction. Because if people get taken advantage of, usually, which is my argument, it's only when they are incapable of evaluating and thinking rationally and using common sense. So if you have this like everything is perfect attitude where you're just very positive and nice to everybody all the time, then you're absolutely going to get taken advantage of. And that's not always the worst thing in the world, but if you have a positive attitude and you treat people fairly, and you are competent enough to evaluate good performance, that is the sweet spot. that it's the sweet spot for every single engineering manager, tech lead, whatever, what have you, any leader, I would say. What is it they say? Speak softly but carry a big stick. That might not be exactly a good metaphor for what I'm trying to say here, but what I'm basically saying is that you can smile at the world and be very nice to everybody and treat people fairly all the time, while still being very open and forthcoming with the expectations that you have, and also making sure that you check up on the expectations. Because if you do that, it's a little bit like being a good parent, in my opinion, where if you trust your kids, that's great, but you have to set some boundaries, and they have to know that those boundaries means something. And that means that you have to have some measure of understanding of what's going on in their lives, because if you ignore them or if you don't pay them attention, that's going to come back, and it's going to hurt you and it's going to hurt the kids. And the same thing can be said for your software developers. If you can evaluate roughly how much they are outputting, how much do they, how like what is sort of reasonable for a junior, mid-level, etc., to output. You get some experience in measuring sort of how well people are doing. You get a pretty good gut feeling for things, and it's very difficult to take advantage of you in that situation. But as I said with my little story, sometimes you have to be a little bit pragmatic about it, and because you don't want to be that person who just immediately, oh, this person had a bad week, or this person wasn't doing so well right on this thing, like let's fire them immediately. You have to like be a bit level-headed about things, and in some cases you can solve the entire problem by just having a conversation with the person who sort of seems to be doing something iffy. What is it? I think it's Mr. Jordan Peterson who said, if you're in doubt, assume ignorance or incompetence over malicious intent or malevolence or something like that. And I think that's a very good way of approaching it. Try to make sure that it's just not some type of misunderstanding before you jump to the assumption that people are trying to take advantage of you. Have a great day.